Hello, welcome to my channel.
It was a typical hot day in a small suburb. The sun was high in the sky, and the sidewalks were flooded with light. Patricia, a middle-aged woman, had always enjoyed her morning walks. She stopped to catch her breath, holding a bag with some minor purchases. Her simple appearance and calm movements seemed to emphasize her inner harmony. She could not have known that her life would temporarily change that day. The street Patricia was walking down was typical of the suburbs. Neat houses with flat lawns, a few shops at the intersection, and a small park nearby. But this perfect peace was suddenly disturbed when a police car appeared on the street. It was moving slowly, as if in search of someone or something. The driver, a tall man in uniform, was a typical representative of the authoritarian approach to work. His gaze stopped on Patricia, and a cold glint appeared in his eyes. The policeman parked his car on the sidewalk and got out. His posture was tense, and his every movement expressed hidden aggression. He approached the woman, clearly intent on finding out who she was and why she was on the street. This looked unusual to Patricia, but she had no reason to suspect that she might be the object of such interest. She knew she had done nothing wrong. The officer started asking questions. His tone was harsh and arrogant. He looked at her carefully, as if trying to find signs of guilt. The woman answered calmly, but it was not enough. The policeman seemed to decide that she was a threat and decided to proceed further. He started looking for excuses for his actions, inventing reasons to detain her. People began to gather in the street. Several passers-by stopped to see what was happening. They saw the policeman talking to the woman, but they could not hear what was being said. Their faces expressed surprise and incomprehension. Patricia stood up straight, not showing her excitement, although she felt fear inside. The policeman apparently realized that he had gathered enough grounds for his actions and decided to arrest her. He took her by the arm and handcuffed her, causing outrage among the crowd. People began to discuss what was happening, and some even tried to intervene, but the officer made it clear that he would not tolerate any objections. The situation was becoming tense. Patricia was put in a police car and taken to the station. Her shopping bag was left on the sidewalk, which only added to the drama of the scene. People continued to stand and discuss what had happened, trying to understand why this woman had been arrested. Their eyes showed distrust of the police officer and sympathy for Patricia. At the police station, the situation did not improve. The policeman behaved in the same arrogant manner, not giving her the opportunity to explain who she was and why she was there. He seemed to enjoy his power and the fact that he could control the situation. The other officers in the station looked confused. They saw that their colleagues' actions were questionable, but none of them dared to intervene. Time passed, but Patricia continued to remain calm. She knew the truth was on her side, and sooner or later it would come out. However, the atmosphere in the police station was difficult. The police officer who arrested her continued to behave arrogantly, without regard for her rights. He felt that he was in a position of power, and this only increased his aggression. This part of the story shows how injustice and prejudice can affect the lives of innocent people. But it also makes it clear that even in the darkest moments, there is room for hope and justice, which will come. Time in the police station dragged on slowly. Patricia sat in a cold, sterile room with white walls, watching the policeman who had detained her peer through the door window from time to time. His arrogant appearance and careless attitude only increased the tension. It was clear that he saw no need to explain his actions or give her the opportunity to defend herself. The other officers in the station, although going about their business, could not help but notice how this situation was out of the normal course of events. They knew the police officer who had arrested Patricia, and his reputation was not good. His actions were often perceived as biased or unreasonable. But in this situation, no one wanted to risk their position by speaking out against him. After some time, one of the junior officers, James, decided to check the information about the woman in custody. He was concerned that something in the case did not add up. James entered Patricia's data into the database to find out if there were indeed grounds for her detention. He expected to see standard information, but the results of the check shocked him. Patricia was not just an ordinary citizen, but one of Hollywood's most famous stars, Keanu Reeves. She was his mother, a person who had always remained out of the media spotlight, but had a deep connection to him. James was shocked by this information and realized that the situation could become a serious issue if it became known. Sensing that the matter required immediate intervention, James approached the senior officer in charge of the shift and shared his findings. The senior officer, while trying to remain calm, could not hide his excitement. They knew that the police officer who had detained Patricia had exceeded his authority, and now this could have serious consequences for the entire department. Meanwhile, Patricia remained in the detention room, watching the commotion in the corridor. The officers were talking quietly, glancing at her. She realized that something had changed, although she didn't know what it was yet. Her calm appearance and restrained behavior only emphasized her dignity in this difficult situation. A few minutes later, a senior officer came into the room, accompanied by James. Their behavior was completely different from that of the previous officer. They politely apologized to Patricia for the misunderstanding and asked her to wait a little while they clarified all the circumstances. In the meantime, information about her detention had already begun to spread. James, realizing that the situation could get out of hand, contacted Keanu Reeves' representatives. He didn't want it to turn into a media scandal, but he knew that the actor had a right to know what had happened to his mother. A few minutes after the call, a black car arrived at the police station. A tall man in simple but elegant clothes got out of it. His face was serious, and his gaze was determined. It was Keanu Reeves. He calmly entered the police station, greeted the officers, and asked them to explain what had happened. Keanu's presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The officers, who had previously looked confident, were now visibly nervous. The officer who had detained Patricia tried to justify his actions, but his arguments sounded weak and unconvincing. Keanu listened to him calmly, but his silence was more eloquent than any words. This part of the story ends when Keanu asks the senior officer to give him access to the detention records. He wants to understand how and why this happened, and whether there were any justifiable reasons for the officer's actions. The tension in the department had reached its peak, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The presence of Keanu Reeves in the station completely changed the dynamics of the situation. He remained calm, but his determination was felt in every movement. It was immediately clear that he would not let this case go unnoticed. The senior officer invited him to his office for a conversation, while the other police officers tried to avoid unnecessary contact with him. The police officer who had detained Patricia now looked confused and nervous. In the senior officer's office, Keanu asked for a full report on his mother's detention. The senior officer, realizing the seriousness of the situation, quickly prepared the documents. The report, as expected, did not contain any grounds for detention. This was a result of the police officer's bias, which became obvious even to his colleagues. Keanu reviewed the report and appealed to a senior officer. "I want this situation to be thoroughly investigated. The people who are supposed to protect citizens should not use their power to humiliate an injustice." Meanwhile, Patricia sat in the detention room. She heard muffled voices outside the door and realized that something important was happening. Her heart was filled with relief. She knew that her son would not leave this case alone. The policeman who detained Patricia tried to defend his actions. He talked about suspicions and the fact that the woman could have been involved in the offense. But all his arguments seemed weak and unfounded. Keanu listened to him in silence, but his look said more than any words. The other officers also did not support their colleague, realizing that he was acting biased. When Keanu asked for an explanation as to why his mother was detained, the officer began to falter in his answers. His tone changed from aggressive to defensive. A senior officer, seeing this, decided to intervene and question the officer. "Why did you decide that this woman was a threat? What evidence did you have?" The policeman could not provide any convincing answers. His silence was the last proof of his guilt. The senior officer immediately ordered Patricia's release. Her handcuffs were removed, and she was finally able to leave the room. When she saw Keanu, her eyes filled with tears. She hugged her son, feeling relieved and grateful. For her, This was not only the end of a humiliating episode, but also a confirmation that justice can prevail even in the darkest moments. Keanu helped his mother leave the police station. Journalists who had learned about the situation had already begun to gather outside. Keanu ignored them and got into the car with Patricia and drove away. He realized that the media would quickly pick up the story, but the main thing for him was to make his mother feel safe. After Patricia's release, the situation did not end. Keanu contacted his lawyer to initiate an official investigation into the police officer's actions. He also made a statement to the media, emphasizing that this situation is just one of many examples of bias in law enforcement. His words resonated widely, and the public began to demand changes in the system. This part ends with the feeling that the fight for justice has only just begun. But Keanu was determined to see the case through to the end to protect not only his mother, but also other people who might be victims of similar injustice. The morning after Patricia's release, the story had already spread online and on television. News headlines talked about the unjust detention of Keanu Reeves' mother, and a video from the police station shot by one of the witnesses began to gain millions of views. The public was outraged. People demanded accountability for the police officer's actions, and the police station came under pressure from the media and activists. Keanu did not stand aside. He made an official statement via social media, emphasizing the importance of respect for every person, regardless of their appearance or social status. His message was short but powerful. This is not just about my mother. This is about everyone who faces prejudice and injustice every day. We must demand accountability from those who are supposed to protect, not humiliate. Keanu's words provoked a wide response. Discussions and actions in support of reforms in the law enforcement system began in many cities. People shared their own stories of unfair treatment by police officers. This situation became a symbol of a broader problem that had been brewing for a long time. Meanwhile, an internal investigation has been launched at the police station where the incident took place. The police officer who detained Patricia was temporarily suspended from duty. A senior officer called a press conference to say that their officer's actions did not meet the standards of behavior and apologized to Patricia and her family. But the public demanded more real change. Support for Patricia and her son came from all over the world. People wrote letters, left comments on social media, and even sent gifts. For many, this story has become a reminder that kindness and support can stand up to injustice. Keanu, while grateful for the support, decided to use this attention for a greater purpose. He announced the creation of a foundation that would help people who were victims of unfair treatment by law enforcement. The fund was to provide not only legal aid, but also advocate for police reforms. A few days after the incident, Patricia received an invitation for a television interview. She was not a public person and always tried to stay in the shadow of her son's fame. But this time she agreed because she realized how important this story had become for others. In an interview, she spoke about that day and her feelings. Her words were simple but insightful. This situation showed me how vulnerable we all can be to injustice. But I also saw that there are many people who are willing to fight for the truth and help others. This gives me hope. The audience appreciated her sincerity and modesty. The interview was another proof that true strength lies in humanity. The resonance around this story forced law enforcement agencies not only to investigate the police officer in question, but also to revise some of their policies. The city began implementing anti-bias training and created an independent commission to review citizen complaints. Keanu and his mother remained calm but determined. For them, the situation was a reminder of the importance of fighting for justice. Although the road to change was long, their story was the first step on the way. The months following the incident were a period of change. The story of Patricia Reeves and her son, the famous actor Keanu Reeves, left an indelible mark on the hearts of people around the world. This case opened the eyes of many and made them rethink the meaning of humanity, justice, and responsibility. But for Patricia, it was also a personal challenge that she overcame with dignity. After the investigation was completed, it became known that the police officer who detained Patricia was fired for abuse of power. The department carried out internal reforms, introducing mandatory training on ethics, anti-bias, and proper treatment of citizens. This was only the first step, but it meant that Patricia's story did not go unnoticed. The publicity surrounding this case helped to open up discussions at the national level. Politicians, activists, and civil society leaders began working to develop new initiatives to prevent similar incidents. Patricia's name has become a symbol of the fight for justice. The foundation, established by Keanu Reeves in memory of this event, quickly became one of the most influential organizations supporting victims of injustice. It has provided legal aid, organized advocacy campaigns, and worked to implement educational programs for law enforcement. Keanu was actively involved in the foundation's work, using his popularity to draw attention to the problems of systemic bias. Patricia also became an important part of the foundation's work. She participated in meetings with victims, shared her experience, and supported those who found themselves in similar situations. Her deep wisdom and calm attitude to life have become a source of inspiration for many. For Patricia, this case marked a new stage in her life. She began to appreciate the simple moments and how they affect the people around her. Her relationship with Keanu became even stronger. They often spent time together discussing not only their work, but also how to make the world a better place. One day, while sitting in a small cafe in Los Angeles, Patricia noticed a woman who looked at her timidly and approached her. It was one of those whom the foundation had helped to recover from unfair treatment. The woman thanked Patricia for her story, which gave her the strength to fight. For Patricia, it was the moment when she realized that her experience was not in vain. Patricia and Keanu's story has become a source of inspiration for millions. It reminded us that even the most famous people can face injustice, but this does not mean that they are powerless. On the contrary, their example shows that change is possible if we act with determination and compassion. Patricia often said, "Everyone has the right to dignity, and each of us can do something to ensure that this right is respected. Never be afraid to stand up for the truth." This story has left a light in many hearts. For Patricia, it was proof that even in the darkest moments, light can be found. For Keanu, it was another opportunity to use his popularity for good deeds. And for the world, it was a reminder that humanity and justice must always prevail.
Goodbye.